Hi, like and subscribe for the more true stories. It's not on record as the drowning experiment. The official name is AQ-G4, but I've chosen to call it what it truly was. It was marketed as an opportunity for people with previous experience in aquatic settings to earn high positions for coastal work, aquamarine research, and other well-paying jobs. The premise was simple. Prove you can handle endurance tests in water, pass a physiological evaluation, and some tests for intelligence, and the jobs will open up. As an unemployed 25-year-old Guy living with his parents, this seemed like a promising opportunity. I grew up along the coast, where swimming, surfing, and scuba diving on occasion were pastimes I'd learned to love. I called the number on the listing and set up my appointment.
The nearest facility was only 60 miles from my house, and an hour commute didn't bother me. The area was nice enough that I would have been more than happy to find a place to rent and start working there. I parked my rusted Jeep in the parking lot and took in a breath of the fresh ocean air. It was bitter, but even winters in California are still warm enough for me. I scanned the cars in the parking lot as if to measure up the competition. Several old vehicles on the brink of breaking down were parked around me. Along the west side of the building was a fleet of very nice-looking SUVs. I peeked inside of the nearest one, thinking I might get a company vehicle like that if I landed a nice enough job. I walked into the front door and was greeted by metal detectors and a guard. I removed my cell phone and wallet and proceeded to a woman standing behind a rather sturdy sheet of glass, similar to what you'd see in a bank. She took my information and had me take a seat in the waiting area. I let my mind wander as I surveyed the group of people populating the area. People of all ages were waiting eagerly for the chance to make plenty of bank. I sat next to a 39-year-old guy named Eric. He told me about his wife and his 2 children. His oldest daughter was going to college next year, and he needed the money to put her through college. He was a great guy, and he spoke elegantly about his love for both his wife and his daughters. A young girl across from us named Chloe chimed in about how she was a sophomore in college about 20 minutes from the facility. She wanted to find a job during college, so she wouldn't end up unemployed after graduation. I wish I was as smart as her when I was that age. A man walked in and escorted the group back into a pristine room filled with very expensive-looking machinery. Polished stainless steel equipment occupied the spotless room. The group, maybe 13 in total, all gave the same impressed look while they let their eyes dance from corner to corner. "I'm glad to see such a nice turnout," he said. "We're going to start in our new ocean simulator we just had installed." We walked through a set of double doors to see a giant indoor pool. It must have been at least 50 feet wide and long. It was intimidating, but I'd adopted the false hope that I was in good hands. "This is 20 feet deep," the man said. "Nothing compared to the ocean just behind us, but it's plenty deep for our first tests." It all started off mundane. We swam to the middle of the pool with the task to tread water for 15 minutes. Nobody wavered, but worse was to come. The man pointed towards the east side of the pool, where a man standing behind a table full of equipment gave him a nod. Within a few seconds, 2 large pieces of equipment on opposite sides of the pool began vibrating up and down. Gentle waves began crashing into us as we continued to tread. Some of us were blown away by the engineering of the machinery.
A few in the group stood out for their arrogance. Ooh, they scoffed when the waves came in, but we'd already been treading for 15 minutes. 10 minutes of waves hit us, and 2 people gave up during this test. They struggled to swim to the edges of the pool, but made it to safety. "Is this all we're going to do?" a man in the group yelled out. The man who brought us in smiled and nodded towards the man at the table. He flipped a switch, and the lights dimmed. We couldn't see the edges of the pool anymore, and looked around to greet each other with the same scared expression. "Let it rip," the man said as machines whirred from all sides of the pool. Waves hit us from all directions as we thrashed around. Only a few minutes passed as I heard people behind me screaming, so loudly it pierced my eardrums. "Someone help me, I recognized that voice. It was Chloe. I turned to see if I could help her, but it was too dark to see more than a few feet away. I heard screams and cries in every direction. It was a battlefield with no gunfire. The relentless waves hitting us from every path were clearly winning this war. I felt something swimming below me and assumed they slipped a few people to help the weak. The lights flipped on, the waves fell silent, and 6 of us remained. I looked around and locked eyes with Eric. I scanned the crowd, but Chloe was gone. I looked at my watch. We were only in the chaos for 7 minutes, and it wiped out half the participants. "The others have been escorted out of the building," the man conducting the test said. "Congratulations on passing. Dry off and we'll run further experiments after lunch." We walked into the parking lot, where Eric offered to give me a ride to a nearby restaurant. "The fuck was that?" he asked, as we sat down with our food. "No clue," I responded, as I took a sip of my Diet Coke. We didn't speak much and didn't eat too much food, as we knew we'd be subjected to more punishment later that day. There was something somber, yet powerful about our meal together. I felt as if there was something special about us, in the fact we'd made it through the mayhem, but celebration wasn't in order. We arrived back at the facility and sat patiently in the waiting room again. The few of us that remained weren't excited. We were worried. Like me, I knew they were slim on other options and hoped a little bit of tough work would pay off in the long run. "Follow me. We're going on a field trip," the man said, as he motioned us through the front doors. We followed towards a beautiful boat, parked just past the parking lot. Loading in one by one, we rowed along into the ocean. "There may be some scenarios where you find yourself stuck at ocean," he said. "Every job will know your general location, but it may take time for help to arrive. We've tested your ability to survive a storm, but endurance is also a necessity." We rowed until the coastline was hardly visible. We were dumped into the ocean without life jackets and told to stay afloat. Whether it be paddling our feet or lying on our backs, stay afloat. "We will have you out here for 1 hour," he said. "You've got food in your stomachs, and we know where you are. We will monitor you from a distance to make sure you're safe and can handle the task." "Make it 2, said a familiar voice. It was the same guy from the pool who wasn't impressed with the gentle waves. The man conducting the tests looked at him from the boat with a look of dissatisfaction. "If you would like a 2-hour test, go take the SAT," he responded. "We're sticking to 1 hour." The boat drove off and we were stuck in the ocean. You'd think there would be plenty of chatter to pass the time, but nobody was saying a word. Eric was lying on his back, while a few of the others elected to stay vertical and paddle their feet.
The sun beat down on us while we shivered. Just because it's California doesn't mean the water is going to be warm. I lay on my back and floated for what felt like an eternity. I imagined what I'd be doing after the testing was over. The thought of having a secure future brought me the hope I needed to continue on. I checked my watch. 34 minutes had passed. I looked around to see how the others were doing, and I noticed someone was missing. I brought it up to everyone else, and we scanned the waters around us to see if they'd floated off. We didn't see anyone. "Fuck this," a woman said in the commotion. "I'm swimming back to shore. Who's coming with me?" I looked at Eric. We were both considering it, but when he said he was staying there, I agreed to stay with him. A man in the group joined her as they set off for the coast. It was me, Eric, and the asshole who thought he was too good for the tests. Eric and I talked to pass the time after the others left. We wondered if they'd be able to swim that far before they would succumb to fatigue. The thought of your body giving up with no escape for safety scared us. He also told me about how he'd been unemployed for about 6 months and needed this badly to support his family. I told him I just didn't know what else I was going to do if this didn't work out. I checked my watch. It had been 1 hour and 18 minutes since they dropped us off. "Well, you got your wish for a 2-hour test," I said to the guy stranded with us. "Good," he replied sharply. "Survival of the fittest. By 3:51, I'd about given up hope." We were tired, even though lying on my back was no exercise. The endless waves were beating me down. My fingers and toes were completely numb, and I couldn't see the shoreline at all at this point. "I can't do it anymore," Eric said to me. He was white. His rosy cheeks had lost all color. His eyes conveyed more information than any of his words could. They were empty. I wasn't looking at Eric anymore. I saw a broken man. I saw what happens when you lose everything. He started to sink when I swam over to him. I thrashed violently trying to get to him in time, but I couldn't save him. I dove below the surface to try and grab him, but he was too far down to save. I watched him sink until the water turned black. "Shouldn't have tried to get a job in the water," the man said. When he said that, I lost it. I swam over to him and wrapped my hands around his neck. His slight grin turned to panic as I held him under the water. His eyes opened wide as his arms lashed through the surface. "Maybe you shouldn't either," I screamed as I held him down. I felt his heartbeat racing as my hands clasped around his neck, tighter and tighter. The fight was over. His eyes rolled back, his arms and legs draped below his lifeless body. As I released him, he sank, and I was alone. Minutes later, the boat returned. The man administering the tests helped me into the boat and congratulated me on passing the test. It was 4:06. I had been in the water a lot longer than the hour he'd promised. "Why did you come back so late?" I asked. "Boat issues," he replied, without even looking in my direction. We arrived back at the facility where the woman behind the counter returned my phone and wallet to me. "Hey, can you tell me what Eric's last name is?" I asked. "It's Griffin," she responded. "You can expect an email within the next few days. We have employers who are excited to interview our candidates." I thanked her and left the building. I looked on Facebook and found his page. I sent a message to his wife, letting her know what happened. The next day, the bodies of the 2 participants that tried to swim back to shore were found. They had injuries that didn't match up with shark attacks. The causes of death were unknown. I never got a single email offering me a job. Eric's wife messaged me back a few weeks later, telling me they settled on a lawsuit. She got $2 million. It wasn't worth it to her. She would have taken Eric back over the $2 million in a heartbeat. Money doesn't replace people, but people can be bought with a broken promise of hope. I was struggling after the first run of trials. I'd see Eric's dead body drifting into the abyss in my dreams. Every time I would shower, the water hitting me reminded me of Chloe's screams in the pool. I saw online that Chloe passed away. Those swimming under my feet weren't rescue divers. They were disposing of the bodies before the lights turned on. This wasn't just for Eric and Chloe. This was for all of us. I reached out to the police in an effort to make sure this didn't happen again. I sat down at the police station in a rusted metal chair as I watched officers hustle people in and out of rooms. The occasional bail here, a distressed victim there. As I've witnessed, there is too much tragedy in life, and this was a hot spot for the brutal aftermath of it. My name was called, and I sat down across from a detective at his desk. I witnessed people die due to the negligence of a company just an hour south of us, I said. Everyone else died, but there was a lawsuit against them that won. Shouldn't that be enough, along with my testimony, to prove something bad happened? Sure thing, he responded. Tell me what happened. I went to this place, offering jobs to people who were good in water, I said. They'd get us connected with job opportunities after some test. Aqua hiring? He interrupted. Yes, that's the place, I replied. Do you know about them? Yep, he said. We've launched investigations into them in the past. We never found anything out of the ordinary. But people have died there, I pleaded. He leaned in close enough for me to smell the morning coffee and cigarettes he huffed down on his way to work. Listen, there's nothing more we can do, he said. My wife went there 3 years ago, never came back. His blue eyes trembled as he fought back tears. He had pictures of his wife on his desk. She was beautiful. The happiness he once displayed died along with her. I knew he cared, and he wanted to help. This was above him, and the whole local police force for that matter. We were escorted by a young woman into another pristine room filled with sci-fi looking equipment. As my peers looked on with amazement, I saw nothing but devices built for the purpose of pushing a body past its limits. We walked towards another pool with the same dimensions as the previous one. We waded out to the middle and assumed our positions. After treading for 10 minutes, the same machines as the prior ones began vibrating up and down. Gentle waves moved us around, which forced nobody out of the pool. I was prepared for the lights to cut out when nearly the opposite happened. You must be able to remain calm even through the most disorienting events, the woman said, as bright lights of every color burst from the ceiling. At the same time, the machines jerked sideways from opposite sides, creating an undertow. This was new. I couldn't see my own hands as lights bombarded my eyes. The current was pulling everyone, including me, under the water every few seconds. It felt like someone was pulling my feet violently as I struggled to resurface. Gasps of breath, which only caused my lungs to burn, were my only means of survival. After only 4 minutes of this, 5 of us remained. The ones who couldn't pass this test have been escorted out, the woman said. You've earned a lunch before your next test. I didn't make any friends during this. The last thing I needed was to make relationships with people who were walking tombstones in my eyes. After a meal, I returned to see another beautiful boat sitting near the parking lot. I fought every urge in my body to run. Gut feelings can give you a lot of information. Your brain telling you to run is another. I walked back into the main room and waited. The woman escorted us to the boat, where we drove into the ocean. Our pool can only simulate the ocean so well, she said. This is a true test of your endurance. We'll be monitoring you guys from a safe distance, and we'll be back in 1 hour to retrieve you. We jumped out of the boat in a single file line, but as the last girl was preparing to leave, I saw the woman give her a pat on the back. The girl winced in pain as she fell out, and the boat drove off. After no more than 2 minutes in the water, we noticed streaks of red floating around us. I asked the girl to turn around, and I noticed a small cut on her back. "That bitch cut me," she said. Her wound was the least of my worries. We were in the middle of the ocean with blood in the water. "Okay, listen, we have to swim back as a unit," I said. "There is safety in numbers, and we have to make sure she's okay." "Hell no," a guy chimed in. "She can swim back to the shore and you can be her bodyguard. I'm landing a job." "You don't understand. They're not coming back," I yelled. But it didn't matter. Either I confessed everything to them, or I played along. "At least, not for an hour," I continued. "It's a small cut. I'll be fine," she said in an effort to calm down the situation. "Everyone just take a deep breath. We can pass the time with a few stories. Who wants to go first?" Before anyone spoke up, a man behind me was pulled underwater. We turned around, his forearm barely connected to a hand float to the surface. Veins stuck out. Fat and muscle clung to the shattered remains of the bones. Blood surrounded us as panic set in. She wasn't cut on accident. This was the same test, just modified. "Stop swimming and thrashing," I yelled in an effort to save the others. "It only attracts more sharks." I spun around looking everywhere I could to watch for sharks incoming. One of the men in the water began crying. He told us he wanted to tell his wife he loved her one last time. Every passing second felt like minutes in my head. This wasn't a test of endurance. We were playing Russian roulette with a chamber full of bullets, and it all depended on who was under the gun next. "I see one coming. Please help." The girl with a cut yelled as a shark jumped out of the water and grabbed her. She continued to scream and pled to us as we watched it jerk her back and forth. Her outstretched hands, reaching for hope, only grasped the air she'd never breathe again. She was being thrown around like a rag doll, showing just how helpless we were in comparison to the predators swarming us. Within 10 seconds, she was cut in half. There were only 3 of us left. "Fuck this, man. I'm going back to shore," said the man, who initially refused to leave. He swam about 20 feet before he met the same death the others had. I looked around me. I was greeted by an arm, half a woman, and one other man who was terrified. "If you swim back to shore on your back, you'll be fine," I said. "Just don't paddle and move around so much that it draws attention to us." I knew it was a lie, and I knew he'd be found dead. This was necessary. I had to make sure I got out alive with the evidence to finally end this horrible company. Before he began swimming, the boat returned, and the woman, along with a few other workers, swiftly dragged us back into the boat. "I'm so sorry that happened," she said. "We came in as soon as we could." I knew she was lying through her teeth. I could have said something, but everything I had been through from that point on would have been for nothing. We returned to the facility where, to my surprise, the testing wasn't over. "We just have one last test before you're all done," she said happily. 3 people were mauled to pieces, and she was acting as if nothing had happened. We were escorted back into the facility, where we entered a large room with 2 tanks filled with water. Hop into these tanks, where we're going to have you hold your breath, she said. Give us a wave when you can't go any longer, and we'll open them for you. Also, Mr. Johnson, can you give me your watch? Why, I like to have it on me, I asked. It monitors my heart rate, and I just feel naked without it on my wrist. Our tanks receive signals from our computers, and any kind of technology can interfere with it, she said. You'll get it back along with your phone and wallet afterward. I knew she was lying to me. Her brown bangs couldn't hide the malice in her eyes. I reluctantly handed over my watch, but left the microphone running, just in case she held on to it during the testing. These tanks were above ground, with steel beams holding them up. They were about 3 feet off the ground and roughly 7 feet tall. They were just wide enough to house a person in them. As I climbed a ladder on the side and descended into the tank, along with the guy who survived the ocean with me, the tops sealed shut. I felt the claustrophobia set in as the round glass entrapped me. I had a realization after being in there for only a few seconds. I couldn't move my arms. How was I supposed to wave to them if I needed to be released? I remained as still as I could as I watched the clock on the north wall. The second's hand danced slowly, as if mocking me. We were both trapped behind a wall of glass, but its battery would last longer than my lungs. I looked over at the man in the second tank as he began flinching. We had been holding our breath for over 2 minutes, and he didn't have much longer. His head jerked back and forth as his body slammed against the glass. He was pounding his fists against the walls, but couldn't break them as his arms were forced against his sides. His screams for help were imprisoned to the bubbles bursting from his mouth, swarming around his head. My own lungs were constricting, but I still had time. A fire burned in my chest as I watched him become motionless. The lid to my tank opened seconds later. We'll have medical professionals tend to him, she said to me. He'll be okay. I walked back into the waiting area to gather my belongings from the man behind the sheet of glass, where he handed me my phone, wallet, and watch. You have a great day now, Mr. Hicks, he said. I froze. They knew me. Nobody came after me, nor did they attempt to stop me from leaving. I quickly walked out of the building back to my car. I looked through my phone. They didn't touch it. I then inspected my watch. Hopelessness is the only word I can use to describe what came over me. Never in my life have I felt so defeated and filled with despair. I lost everything. They removed the memory card from my watch.
It was nothing extraordinary. No backpack, no walking stick, no geolocator app on my phone, just casual walks through Whiteleaf Park. It wasn't so much a hobby for me as it was a way to pass the time, if that makes sense. Something to do and enjoy without placing any real expectations on it. Sometimes I'd spend hours watching the new crop of butterflies migrating. Other afternoons I'd just take a brisk stroll to forget about a specific customer at work. I worked in sales, as a cashier, specifically. Good Books, the soulless chain store that changed its name to Books, ! Included, for a brief period in 2006. When I was a teenager, it seemed like an easy job with the added benefit of getting my hands on new releases before anyone else. In my 20s, however, the charm of reading the latest committee-scripted franchise novel was a lot less appealing. I started spending more time staring at the kiosk of adult calendars than anything else. If you ever want to know what it's like to feel alone in a public place, work in a bookstore. It has all the deathly quiet of a library, combined with the social ineptitude of every awkward introvert you avoided in high school. Lord help you if you start a conversation with anyone, at any time, because they're going to explain their favorite author or preferred genre of literature as if you haven't heard of it. All you can do is nod periodically. It was around sunset when I went to Whiteleaf that night. There was a spot where I liked to chill out, maybe work through a few pages of a tale I wasn't actually very interested in, and convince myself that the world was still a magical place beyond the beige walls of my self-made consumerist prison. I don't know if it was because of the waning light, but I think it took several minutes for me to realize I was on the wrong path. Instead of the normal gravel bed that had been laid out by the Park Service, I found myself on a foot-beaten rut of dark soil walled by knee-high weeds. Realizing I must have let my mind wander enough to get moderately lost, I turned around and headed back. Still, the path progressed deeper into the trees. Even after completely turning the way I'd just come from, I still seemed to be going the wrong way. As the setting sun dropped below the leaves and night started to creep in, I found mild relief in a small clearing. From there, I could check for landmarks and get a better idea of where I was. At the end of the day, which was now literally approaching, I could always just swallow my pride and phone someone for help. I hadn't been in that specific clearing before. That much was immediately clear. A large blue-green pond lay at the center of the area, ringed with cattails and milkweed. Dragonflies skimmed the water, leaving a labyrinthine pattern in their tiny wakes. I had stumbled onto a nature painting, but all I cared about at the moment was getting back on track. I had just given up on figuring out where I was when I heard the bubbles. A burst of air swelled up from the otherwise still body of water, breaking the silence with a wet belch so raucous that left my feet for a moment. Turning from the glow of my phone to the dimly moonlit pond, I quickly prepared to run from whatever primordial animal had made its home there. I hadn't seen an alligator in the park, and wasn't even sure if they lived there. But the thought had crossed my mind every time I passed any hidden body of water. Instead, I watched a fluttering expanse of pure white float to the surface. Cloth, clothing. Shrouded in the white, I could see a human form. Someone had fallen in, and the air that had escaped must have been their last breath before drowning. All fear of aquatic reptiles and distaste for leeches flew free from my head as I rushed to the pond's edge. My haste was dampened as the slog through muck and pushback of water against my legs turned a heroic dash into an awkward waddle. As I came out, dragging the limp body as best I could, my eyes searched frantically for the path back out of the area. There would be no way I could call 911 and give accurate directions at that point. In the heat of the moment, it seemed like there was no longer any path at all. Moving the cloth from the drowning victim's face, I found yet another dreadful mockery of my fragile concept of reality. The body was long dead, emaciated, beyond any sort of identification, eyes rotted out into dark pits, stringy hair clumped and matted. There was absolutely no way this was a recent cadaver. My grip loosened from sheer shock and disgust, and in a final act of defiance against the laws of nature, the thing grasped onto me instead. Never return to this place. Its rasping voice croaked, water spilling from its fetid mouth. I jumped to my feet and, turning away from the horrifying thing, took one of the many paths that now lead into the thick brush around me. I screamed, called for help, yelled unintelligible, cowardly things. All the while, the voice called out from the shore of that cursed pond, "Never, ever, 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 ever." I stopped an attendant at the Park Exist and gave him a more conservative rundown of what I had found. He seemed more interested in getting back to picking up trash. I let it go easily, convinced that saying anything at all was more than should be expected of me in that situation. It was their problem now. Fair warning. I stayed out of the park after that. I had no interest in going back, and it wasn't just because of the warning that Sopping Abomination had uttered. No one needed to tell me to stay away after that. I was distant after that. lost in my own repetitive thoughts and trapped in a spiral of internal dread that I couldn't express to another living soul. I phoned it in at work, even more so than before, and I went straight home afterward to wrap myself up in bed and, what else, read. That glassy-eyed malaise made it all the more confusing when, out of the blue, my boss made a confusing offer. The company, Good Books, was looking for a new, regional buyer, someone to oversee the largely automated system of selecting and purchasing products to be shelved in various outlets across the country. As I was told, it was a position that should have been phased out long ago, but didn't seem to get enough attention to be dealt with. Basically, I would be getting paid a much larger salary with benefits in return for clicking an approved button as needed. I could do it from my damned phone if I wanted to. The boss wanted to recommend me for the position. He was close to retirement and didn't have the desire to learn computer, otherwise he would have taken the position himself. When I asked why he wanted me, of all people, he said, "Something won't forget. You're a smart guy, and you don't belong stuck here. A little voice told me to pick you." Suddenly, there was a newer and much more pleasant event in my life to focus on. I won't say I forgot all about the horrific encounter. No, that's definitely going to stick with me forever, and even then, I knew it. However, if I concentrated on it enough, the job opportunity was exciting enough to consume my thoughts. That same night, I broke a personal rule. I accepted a party invitation from one of my fellow wage slaves. He congratulated me on the possible promotion, then dropped mention that he was going to a sick college party that night. I don't know if he meant we should celebrate, or if he just wanted to bring up that he too was going to have a good night. Either way, he asked if I'd be interested and agreed to attend. I could always be a prick and decide not to go later on anyway. When he said, a little voice, said I might like to go, I considered the idea. He had overheard the conversation I had earlier. I feel like I've always stuck out at parties, but it might just be in my own head. It's entirely possible that the awkwardness goes unnoticed by everyone else, especially if they're trying to hide their own shortcomings as well. Still, every conversation that night was on some pop culture topic I knew nothing about, and I wasn't even sure how anyone could hold a conversation above the host's horrible, blaring soundtrack. Before I knew it, I found myself naturally retreating to the rooms with the smallest amounts of partygoers, furthest away from the noise. I ended up in someone's bedroom, a place I wouldn't have dared invade if not for the fact that a few others had already hidden there. I mean, I know other people were in the room, but for the life of me, I couldn't tell you who they were or anything about them. Except for her, of course. A leggy, cool-as-ice girl with glossy black hair and tortoise-shell glasses. She was reclining on the bed as if she owned the place and was leafing through an old Lovecraft collection she must have found on a dusty shelf. "Hey!" I gave a quick, out-of-place nod. "Great party, huh?" I tried to sound sarcastic since both of us were obviously hiding from it, but I think it came across as tragically sincere. "Thrilling," she replied, eyes still on the book. Her sarcastic tone was on point, but I was just happy to get a response. "Lovecraft, huh?" I choked back a sudden tickle in my throat that nearly set off an unattractive coughing fit. Old gods are the best gods, am I right?" She slowly lowered the book and looked up at me with wide eyes. She arched a brow, tilting her head to the side. "You're a fan of H.P. Lovecraft, too?" I nodded enthusiastically as she turned her attention back away from me. "Woo!" The sarcasm struck out again like a serpent that had lain coiled in her throat. This must be fate. I felt my face turn red. I knew I'd make an ass of myself that night, but that was a new level of gut-wrenching. I was about to turn and clumsily push my way out the door when she looked up at me again. She scooted over, dropped the book onto the other side of the bed, and patted for me to sit next to her. "Read to me. My eyes are tired." Fittingly enough, her name was Paige. It would be a year and a half later, after we were engaged, when I finally asked exactly why she decided to humor me that night. There was this little voice that told me to give you a second chance. I want to say my life was perfect, but that wouldn't do it justice. No one really wants a perfect life. The flaws are what make everything work, you know. The job paid well and allowed me the freedom to start planning my own business. But reading through lists of orders and okaying each one was boring as hell. Paige was a goddamn dream, but we had our disagreements from time to time, mostly over what to name our cat. The house we moved into was beautiful, with a spacious lawn and great neighbors who didn't bother us. However, the pipes needed work, and the seller had neglected to tell us the attic was a popular home for yellow jackets. It was perfect, but not too perfect to enjoy. That little voice had done well for me. The realtor heard it when he decided to show us that property, which he was thinking of saving for a friend. The lady at the animal shelter heard the voice when she pulled our kitty off of death row and decided we would be the one family that might actually keep him. It didn't take too many examples of the voice before I connected it back to that night in the pond. I didn't understand it, not entirely, but I had read enough to recognize the general premise. It was possible, just barely possible, that I had made some kind of contract with whatever eldritch being I had encountered. By finding it or trying to save it, or freeing it from its watery grave in some way, I unknowingly entered into a deal that changed my life. My mind swapped things around a bit, and in order to make sense of it all, I started thinking of the thing as a genie or guardian angel. The dread and panic I felt in that moment, why not just sort of push those feelings to the back of my mind and enjoy the idea that it was less horrifying than I was making it out to be? Sometimes your brain avoids bad thoughts or memories on its own, but I was more than willing to just let it happen. In my spare time, I watched a lot of do-it-yourself videos online. I turned a spare room into a small library for Paige and pretended it was a surprise, even though I'm sure she would sneak in there when I wasn't home and check on the progress. She was way too inquisitive to let anything lie and had zero tolerance for being told what to do. I fucking loved it. It confused me when she'd cry at night. Everything was perfectly imperfect. I had everything I wanted. I was happy. Why wasn't she? I woke up a few times to hear her weeping softly in the adjacent bathroom. When I passed the library I'd built for her, I could hear her crying beyond the locked door. Her sadness was the one flaw I couldn't stand. I didn't want her to be in pain. I didn't ask what was wrong because each time I heard her, I should have been asleep, or at least not spying on her. It was a difficult subject to get my head around. Then I accidentally stepped on the landmine. We were having breakfast, sitting across from each other as she buried her nose in an embarrassing young adult novel that made her roll her eyes and chortle every few minutes. I had just watched a video about building a playroom. The site had recommended it, and the designs looked interesting. You know, I chewed thoughtfully on burnt toast. We've never really talked about having kids. The book snapped shut. Paige drew a sharp breath in through her nose, and in seconds I watched her eyes fill with tears. "Honey, what's wrong?" She all but collapsed in sobs. She couldn't have children. I tried to be as sensitive as I could, given the bomb that had been dropped on me. It was a casual thought I had expressed, nothing serious, but now I had brought on something terrible. Nothing I said could console her, from insisting that I didn't care, to reminding her that I loved her more than anything, to suggesting that if she ever wanted to, we could adopt. Nothing I could say was enough to make it better. From that point forward, I didn't think of that corpse in the lake as my personal genie. This was the twist, the price for my Faustian bargain. I could be happy, eternally happy, but the woman I loved wouldn't be. I could have whatever I wanted, but Paige just got me, and I knew I wasn't enough, even if she didn't. The breaking point was when I found her dream book. It was tucked away on a shelf in the library, a completely unremarkable beige journal you'd pick up in any given craft store. I didn't intend to read it. I wouldn't break our trust like that. However, when I noticed she had been putting it away one night after a crying session, I decided to at least check out what the book was. When I removed it from the shelf to look for a title, 3 pictures fell out and scattered on the floor. They had been cut out of magazines. Women with dark hair, glasses, similar to Paige, all holding their newborn children. I was emotionally destroyed. All of the hopeless yearning that had been imbued in that book pulsed through me in waves of black melancholy. I let anger take over. Anger toward life, toward fate, toward the dead wretch that had cursed me in a way so devious that I mistook it for a blessing. After loading some light hiking gear into the car, I told Paige that I wanted to take her out for a special surprise, something that would be fun, just because. In true form, She refused to go without knowing everything, but I was eventually able to convince her to trust me. With a reasonable amount of sighing and groaning, we were off. "Where are we going?" she asked periodically. Not telling. I would reply, doing my best to sound joyfully mischievous. "I get to ask 20 questions and you have to answer them." "Nope." "Let me hold your phone for a second. I need to check something." "I don't have the destination marked on it." "Nice try, though." As we got closer to the park, she grew quiet. I could tell that her mind was working. I could almost hear the gears grinding. Not knowing something drove her crazy, but if I told her where we were headed or why, then I'd be the crazy one. The glare she gave me when we drove into the parking lot at Whiteleaf could have frozen magma. "You're not serious." She folded her arms. "Trust me." I knew there was a 99% chance I wouldn't find that clearing again. In that case, I was prepared to explain that I wanted to show her my favorite reading spot from the days before we'd met. I'd come up with some romantic words about nature and time and spending our lives together, and I'd mean every word of it. The real goal of that trip could easily be hidden away if it didn't work out. The sun was setting again by the time I noticed we had gotten off the established trails. "I don't think we should keep going," Paige noted, and in any other circumstance, I would have completely agreed. "I want to show you something. It's just a bit further." The clearing opened up in front of us. The pond was as calm and foreboding as I had remembered. A chill ran through my body, and it wasn't due to the crisp night air. I heard Paige crunching the leaves behind me as I led her to the edge of the water. "Okay, so," I started, unsure of what to actually say. "Just bear with me on this for a bit." I looked into the water, but couldn't see past its inky surface. The moonlight wasn't helping. "Hey!" I called out. "Look, I know what you did, okay? I know what you've done for me, and I think I get what's going on. Every gift has its price and all that. Standard folktale stuff. You need to stop," Paige chided. I ignored her. I knew what I was doing. "Just give that same gift to my fiancé, Paige, okay? Like, set her up with the deal. A perfect life, little voices, all that. Can't you let her have what she wants more than anything?" Nothing stirred in the pond. In the distance, a frog croaked its unnecessary reply. I stood at the water's edge for as long as I could stand the icy silence. Reluctantly, I shut my eyes tight, grimaced at my own ignorant failure, and turned to explain away what must have looked like sheer insanity. "I said never," Paige moaned. The sorrow in her voice was heavy. When I looked back at her, I stumbled backward, landing in the murky water. It was her, but it wasn't her. Paige stood with her head hung low, a blurred, fading smudge on the face of the universe. All at once, I was looking at the decaying body that had haunted my subconscious for so long. "Never," she repeated, water cascading over exposed, yellowed teeth. "Never, ever, 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 ever." I felt myself sink backward into the muck as the pond enveloped me and blocked out my senses. Choking and gasping for air, I dragged myself up from the water and pulled on fistfuls of rugged weeds until I managed to drag myself out. It was gone. She was gone. Forever. I still have the job, the house, the cat. Nothing disappeared or anything like that. The lack of magic in my life is shockingly evident, even though I didn't fully recognize it when it was there. It's obvious that something very rare and special is absent. I haven't been able to find the clearing again. I went to Whiteleaf every day for the following 3 months, and I mean it when I say every day. Now I hike out each week, so I can camp out and search for full 24-hour periods. I'm not going to stop, even though I know in my heart that I won't find it again. Once in a while, a little voice tells me to give up. I won't listen to it. Never, ever, ever.